Thank you, Robert. And it is really glad good to see you again. It's a great honor to be here and to join you. You know, I've known Robert Pittenger for decades. He is an incredibly extraordinary public servant, someone whose heart is just totally committed to human rights, to people, to security, to making sure that peace, and the greatest human rights abuse, obviously, is war, and that if wars can be mitigated through good strategy, there he is on the front line. So I want to thank him. He served, as you know, in the North Carolina State Senate, and as well as 3 terms right here or across the street in the U.S. House of Representatives, and did a wonderful job. Thank you, Robert, for doing this, and for all of you for being here as well. You know, we're all very aware of what is happening in China. China has been, I remember after Tiananmen Square, I went over there several times. I'm now barred from going by the Chinese Communist Party. I've literally been told you cannot get a visa. But in many trips there, including going to a concentration camp, Beijing Prison Number 2, that had 40 Tiananmen Square activists in it, shaved heads. It's what's happening in Xinjiang. As a matter of fact, it's probably even worse there. It is worse, where they are committing genocide, Xi Jinping, against the Chinese people there, especially the Uyghurs and the others that are ethnically out of touch with the cruel policies of the PRC. All those years, it's been an enabling by the West, especially by the United States of America. Back in 1994, in May, Bill Clinton delinked human rights from trade. And in my humble opinion, that's when we lost China. It was May 26, 1994. Had we been strong and resolute and said, you know, serious and sustained progress in human rights is what we are aspiring to, your people deserve it, we would have had a different China today. But instead, complete capitulation by the White House. And it got so bad that a few years later, Tian, who was the man who was operationally in control of the Tiananmen Square massacre, he was at the White House getting a 19-gun salute from President Bill Clinton as the defense secretary, or the equivalent of that, in China. I held a hearing because this man, Tian, said to the Army War College audience that he spoke to that nobody died at Tiananmen Square. I mean, your lies, you can tell, and you know the People's Daily and all the others carry that forward and amplify it, and you know it's very hard to combat such misinformation. But he said it here. So I put together a hearing in 2 days, invited all of these people who were there at Tiananmen Square to give their testimony about what they saw, including the Time magazine correspondent who watched from his balcony as people were bloodied and killed. And we also invited Tian. He didn't show up. We said, anybody from the embassy, come on, give us an account for that big lie that you just told. So I raise all of that because I think things would have been different had we been strong and resolute, and the United States could have taken the lead on that, and we dropped the ball and fumbled it, and unfortunately many followed us. There was this naive belief that if we just trade more, somehow China would matriculate from a dictatorship to a democracy. Where has that ever worked? And it had no chance, I think. If we had conditions about human rights, I think we would have had, like I said, a different China today. Over the years, I've actually chaired 76 congressional hearings on human rights that are committed by the Chinese Communist Party. 2 of the most recent, one was on DR Congo, which I'll speak to in a moment, and the other was on organ harvesting. I've had several on organ harvesting, but this one blew me away. The fact that 50 to 100,000 people every year, mostly Falun Gong, Christians, Uyghurs, others who are 27, 28 years old, are targeted for their organs. And then we even had one doctor who actually did them at our hearing to tell what that was like. And they get 2 to 3 organs per person, and of course they kill them. That is right out of Nazi Germany. And I mean that sincerely. Joseph Mengele would love a program like that, and yet they're making billions on that, as well as anybody who gets sick in the Chinese Communist Party. Well, where are they going to get their organ from, or organs? They're going to get it from a Falun Gong practitioner. It's horrible that we're not raising this more. I had a big hearing on it. Most of the media in Washington didn't even cover it or give it 1 cent. I've been asked to talk a little bit about the strategic challenge of certain strategic minerals that are very, very important. We know that the Chinese government has 5-year plans on a whole lot of things, including pharmaceuticals, antibiotics. Well, they also have it on these minerals, and they've made it their game plan to monopolize and take it all over, so that everybody has to go traipsing to Beijing or some other place in China in order to get these. And that includes solar panels, it includes other things like cobalt. So we had a hearing in July. We had unbelievably effective and knowledgeable witnesses. It was called the Child Labor and Human Rights Violations in the Mining Industry of the DRC. I chaired it. Piero Tazzi, who's our general counsel for the Lantos Commission, helped arrange the entire thing, did a wonderful job. And why is this so important? According to the International Atomic Energy Agency, the world may see a 40-fold increase in lithium demand and a 20-fold increase in cobalt demand by 2040. Obviously, where are they getting it? 70% plus of all of it's coming from the DR Congo. And I've been to Goma. I've been to those places in the past where the abuse is rampant. And matter of fact, even the peacekeepers, when they were deployed there, I had 4 hearings on that, went over there. They were actually part of the exploitation of little children. United Nations peacekeepers. And it led to Kofi Annan having, an advisory saying that we have zero tolerance. And one of my hearings, I called it zero compliance with the zero tolerance policy. And all of this stuff, all of these materials are coming, and of course, they're coming on the backs of children and on the backs of exploited workers. The estimates are that there are some 35 or 40,000 children in artisanal wells. They have no protection. They go into these wells, they get sick, they don't have equipment on, they shouldn't be there anyway, it's child labor, they should be in school, and of course their parents and the adults are being exploited horribly as well. 70% of the world's cobalt is coming out of DRC, and again, all of the processing of that is occurring in China, again, this monopolization of these minerals. I was going to go into what some of the people were saying at the hearing, but we have experts here who will do that, I'm sure, as well. But, one of our witnesses, Hervé Kanungu, spoke about the conditions in the Kasulo deposit run by Dongfang Congo Mining Company. It's a Chinese company. And he said it's run on a neo-colonialist model, and it harkens to the worst elements of the Belgian colonialism of the Congo years past, but with the full acquiescence, and this is the part that is equally troubling, of the DRC government. He said testified how Congolese military officers have been directed by Chinese managers to literally whip Congolese citizens when they trespass on Chinese-run mines. Likewise, in his book, Cobalt Red, How the Blood of the Congo Powers Our Lives, his book, Siddharth Kara relates a conversation with a Chinese manager from Dongfang Mining at a poolside bar in the Chinese-run club in DR Congo, where Congolese are not even allowed to set foot, and the blatant racism of the Chinese manager towards his African laborers. Quote, "I think they like being poor," the manager scoffed, "because they receive foreign aid and do not want to have to work. If they did not like being poor, why do they spend all day on Sunday in church instead of working?" This, of course, is absolutely false. It's racist. It's anti-religious faith. And not only do these laborers work and work hard under the most extreme conditions, many times it results in death, dismemberment, and diseases like cancer. It should be no surprise to any of us that the Chinese government exports its abusive policies to dominate global supply chains. What is shocking is that the United States continues to rely on China for an estimated 80% of its needs for strategic minerals. Chinese domination in strategic mineral mining continues to be an afterthought in global supply chains. And I'm the author, frankly, of the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000. It is our landmark law on combating sex and labor trafficking. And here we have a situation where labor trafficking, abusing people in order to get product, and we are a part of that supply chain. You know, we say things, there's some rhetoric here and there, but very little to try to mitigate this terrible situation. When I had my hearing, we got no coverage. The press just ignored it. We invited every one of them. I called a lot of the reporters. Don't you want to know about this? You know, the Green New Deal, if you're for electric cars, great, go buy one. But don't do it on the backs of little Congolese children who die and get very sick and have a lifetime of misery because cobalt lithium is being mined by these children. Indeed, our subsidization includes purchasing electric vehicles using batteries, which we all know are reliant on cobalt and lithium. Just yesterday, it was reported that the Department of Energy under Secretary Jennifer Granholm had awarded a $200 million grant to a company called Microvast Holdings, ostensibly to build a battery separator facility in Tennessee, a company which, it was now revealed, operates primarily out of China and under the auspices of the Chinese Communist Party. And they exert substantial influence over the manner in which Microvast must conduct their business activities and may intervene, this is a quote, at any time and at no notice. To add insult to injury, the company has been flagged on the Securities and Exchange Commission watch list of Chinese companies that are on track to be delisted from NASDAQ for not complying with U.S. auditing standards. Yet they got a $200 million grant from my government. That is absurd. Rest assured, we will conduct vigorous oversight into this direct subsidy in the next Congress, especially if I'm reappointed as chairman, which I think I will, of the China Commission. It's the China Executive Committee, which is a bipartisan and bicameral commission. I've chaired it before, and I hope to chair it again, and I think I will. Finally, with regards to the PRC's malign influence on the DR Congo and efforts to control minerals there, I'm in the final stages of drafting some legislation that I intend to introduce this Congress and then vigorously pursue in the next, countering China's exploitation of strategic minerals and child labor in the Democratic Republic of Congo Act. Much of the impetus for this legislation came from that hearing that I mentioned a moment ago in July, and from the testimony of our witnesses, including Sasha Legnev of The Century, who gave really, really good insights, as did the others. Our bill would seek to cleanse our supply chains of goods made by forced and child labor in the DRC, create an enforcement strategy to address this exploitation. A strategy is not only a map forward, it is an identification of what is important and what is not. It would also call for sanctions for those engaging in exploitation, mandate certain disclosures to the SEC, and add cobalt and lithium to the list of minerals covered by Dodd-Frank. Finally, the bill would enlist USAID in seeking to prevent child labor and trafficking in the DRC. I just add, back in the early 2000s, I was the author of the Belarus Democracy Act of 2004. It included two major provisions, and it became law. We did three of them since, and I authored all three of them, the following ones. But it was all about sanctioning individuals and also denying them economically the ability to get a visa to come to the United States. It was a template for the Magnitsky Act, which I was also the House sponsor for, but that we put into a larger bill when we couldn't get it passed, and that is now Global Magnitsky as well, which is, I think, doing a great job. The idea here is to say no complicity with this exploitation of children and even adults in the DR Congo or anywhere else, and we're going to push it hard, and I do believe it'll pass and become law. Robert, thank you again for your leadership and for inviting me to be a part of this.
What a remarkable leader. God bless you, my friend. If we could, let's proceed ahead. Milosi Ikvik, would you like to continue on from Austria? He is an international lawyer, a very brilliant gentleman who serves on the board of the Parliamentary Intelligence Security Forum. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Honorable friends, Your Excellencies, good afternoon. I'm truly humbled by the opportunity to speak on this critical issue today, the issue that determines the future and development of our free nations. I have had a true privilege of witnessing firsthand the passion and determination in actions undertaken by the US Congress, often, I have to say, under Congressman Smith's leadership, which strongly and meaningfully confronted illegal practices and human rights abuses across the globe. As a law professor at one of the most reputable universities in this nation, international arbitrator and advisor on issues on human rights, I have spent the better part of the past decade observing and legally confronting misguided and illicit practices relative to critical minerals. Critical minerals, just to define them, are defined as metallic or non-metallic elements that are essential for modern technologies, economies, or national security, and have a supply chain at risk of disruption. However, this very definition falls desperately short of appreciating a much wider, complex range of global defense challenges and ever more concerning human rights sufferings directly connected to critical minerals and their exploitation. Indeed, rarity of an element and expected profits from its exploitation regretfully incentivize unacceptable practices resulting in wide-range corruption, violations of fundamental human rights, and, as appalling as that may sound, child labor. These illegal practices are elevated to a much more sinister level if the minerals in question are so scarce and essential to the national security of other nations and economies of those nations that abusive powers, especially from Beijing, get a grip on them. It is hence not surprising that the list of most corrupt countries in this world, according to Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index, almost perfectly correspond to those countries that have the highest reserves of critical minerals. Their corruption is not a matter of regional custom, as some may cynically argue, but rather an artificially and intentionally imposed system that awards few while it de facto enslaves many. And the higher the corruption in one country, the stronger the presence and control of foreign abusive powers, such as Beijing. This unprecedented kleptocratic system leads regularly to devastating human toll, to devastating human suffering. According to witness statements given at the mentioned congressional hearings in July this year that I am entirely grateful to Congressman Smith for chairing, abused African miners, and I quote, described a colonial era level of discrimination, being kicked, slapped, beaten with sticks, insulted, shouting at, or sometimes pulled around by the ear when they were not able to understand instructions in Mandarin. Witnesses continued to state that these children are required to crawl into small holes dug into the earth to recover sacks of ore. They are often exposed to radioactive materials, injuries, deadly and painful diseases. And they die at the hands of these diseases. According to U.S. Bureau of International Labor Affairs, almost 20% of all children work in this geographical area, and some of them are 5 years old. I dare, therefore, to argue that free nations should not only hold an ethical obligation, but rather a legal obligation to act and to confront this unprecedented spread of suffering. Child labor, corruption-fueled colonialism, and the return of de facto slavery are prohibited by international law, and all those engaged in these practices have to face justice. I argue as well that countries are obliged to commence international criminal proceedings into companies, countries, and individuals who are engaged in these practices. Furthermore, as the message today is sent to 290 holders of legislative powers in almost 70 countries, we urge you to consider legislation aiming to prohibit the importation of minerals illicitly excavated through child labor or otherwise whose mining fuels conflict in the country of origin, as well as sanctioning all the individuals and companies who hold the power and at whose hands these atrocities are taking place. None of the proposed measures are new. None of these measures are novel. Quite the contrary. Blood minerals have been and still remained under control and exploitation of corrupt entities, triggering mass violence in the past and in some cases arguably even genocidal acts. Turning a blind eye at developments of this moment in history would be an inexcusable act. Every power should be coupled with a duty to those granting it. For the future of our children and the well-being of the children they should share this world with, I allow myself to urge you to confront the agonizing abuses and kindly bring your attention to the hearing of July this year. Civilization and humanity must mean something else. And if you are the countries that hold rare minerals, you should be aware of the pattern Beijing employs in abusing and taking over your sovereign assets. At first, they offer money. They offer loans which do not presuppose any additional guarantees. They offer investment agreements, and at the very end, they offer pure corruption, bags of money flying into your countries. Naturally, some of the politicians are too weak to say no, which leads to a vicious circle of abuse and, again, enslaving many at a price of few. At that stage, Beijing regularly takes over property which is of national security relevance, and with that property continuously abuses, enslaves, and colonizes the country. In short term, the effects are seen at the host country, but in long term, the effects are seen throughout the world. We are heavily dependent on the mentioned minerals, and if we do not undertake any further action, hundreds of thousands of children may die. So I urge you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, friend. Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you, Melos. Excellent. Deeply appreciate your remarks. I'd like to call on Carl Delfield now to come with his remarks, and appreciate your taking the stand.
Thank you.
You can stay there if you
Yeah,
want.
we're just going to stay here, I think.
Pardon?
Yeah. Thank you. Nice to be with you today. I very much enjoyed the previous space panel where we all learned that all our iPhones are connected to space. These iPhones are also full of rare earths and rare metals, which have rare earths and rare metals have certain qualities to allow us to have things like this iPhone, smaller, lighter, more durable, from jet engines to semiconductors to satellites. They are really crucial. As I mentioned yesterday, the Japanese call rare earths and rare metals industrial or technology vitamins. A very small amount makes everything work better, much higher performance, which is why they're so important in the technology century that we live in. Now, rare earths, let's start with just very briefly what are rare earths, because it sounds very mysterious. If you remember back to your high school chemistry, the second from the bottom row, those are the rare earths. There's 17 of them, but there's really only 4 or 5 of them that are really important. And they're very important in permanent magnets, which are in, for example, electric vehicles and F-35 fighters. They make machines move, basically. The 4 or 5 of them probably constitute about 90% of the value of rare earths. So that's the 17 rare earths. Now, U.S. used to dominate the production in our main, really our only rare earth mine, which is in Mountain Pass, California. It's had a very troubled history. It went bankrupt and now has been reconstituted as MP Partners, which is a private equity firm. There's a Chinese partner, believe it or not, that has a 9% stake. We can talk a little bit about Mountain Pass. The new management is doing some things right, and it's going in the right direction, but this is really why I got interested 5-6 years ago. I'm not a metallurgist, I'm an Asia and emerging markets analyst, and I saw how dependent U.S. industry was on Chinese rare earths. For some time, China has produced roughly 80% of the world's rare earths. It's interesting, in 1978-79, Deng Xiaoping famously was quoted as saying, "Saudi Arabia has oil, China has rare earths." And they very steadily picked up market share and developed the industry just roughly something like this. In the 1970s, they produced rare earth concentrate, which is like a cocktail of all the rare earths inside. In the 90s, it began to develop the technology to what they call separation. That's taking that cocktail and taking each one of those 17 rare earths out and isolating them. This is a very environmentally damaging process, and which is another reason why China took it over, because the U.S. environmental safeguards made it very difficult for Mountain Pass to do it. And then in the 90s, they started to go to the next step. You take the rare earths and you use them to form metals, magnets, polishing powders, and then lastly, in the 2000s, they started to incorporate them in final products, electric motors, computers, batteries, mobile phones. And that's where we got where we are. The only other major producer, and the U.S. government is working with this company, it's an Australian company called Lynas. They produce about 15% of the world's rare earths. Right now, the mine is in Australia, Mount Weld, and they do the processing in Malaysia. They plan to open another processing plant in Texas with U.S. government support, so that's a good sign. But it's very interesting how we let this happen, how we let China dominate this industry. The Wall Street Journal just recently noted that the F-35 production line was held up due to Chinese rare earth content in permanent magnets in the F-35 fighter. And as you can imagine, rare earths and their cousin, what I would call rare metals. So let's stop here just for a moment. You have the 17 rare earths, but there's many, many other rare metals, which are also just as important, if not more important. For example, germanium for fiber optics and satellites, gallium for semiconductors and permanent magnets. All these markets, they're just small markets. They're opaque, they're fragile, easily disrupted and manipulated. For example, copper, everybody knows copper, very important metal. About 20 million tons of copper is produced each year. Nickel, another important metal, about 3 million tons. Whereas some of these rare earths, if you add all the rare earths together, it's about 200,000 metric tons. About half of those are not that important. So now you're down to about 100,000 metric tons. Scandium, which is very important for naval shipbuilding, aircraft, 20 metric tons a year production. Unbelievably small market. And then I would say the rare metals, also known as minor metals, strategic metals, critical metals, tech metals, sort of tops out at about 200,000 metric tons a year. So that's how small these markets are and how important they are. Now, in defense, I would just say that the Congressional Research Service estimates it's about 920 pounds of rare earths to make an F-35 fighter, 5,200 to make a destroyer, 9,200 pounds to make a Virginia-class submarine. And as tension is rising in Asia, the pressure and the possibility of conflict over rare earths is definitely there. And I don't know if anyone recalls, but roughly 10 years ago, a Japanese Coast Guard vessel collided with a Chinese trawler in the East China Sea near Senkaku, the disputed island. And the Japanese basically took the ship, the trawler, let the crew go, but kept the captain for questioning. The Chinese lost it completely and basically, for a brief time, about a week, embargoed rare earths exports to Japan. Japan was completely dependent on rare earths and has none. And this led to a tremendous spike in rare earth prices. And ever since then, people have been spooked about them and worried about the availability. And so if America can more fully develop the Mountain Pass mine, also work with Linus to do the refining, because the refining is really the key issue. We need to find new technologies to do it cleaner, more safely, more economical. That's all those things are important, because the price. There's another reason that Apple makes 90% of their products in China, besides low-cost labor and low-cost land. That's where the rare earths are. One of them, neodymium. You wouldn't believe, but a neodymium magnet is right here in your speaker. That's a tiny little magnet. A regular car has hundreds of magnets, and that brings me to clean tech, clean energy, whatever you want to call it. As Congressman Smith said, the transition to a renewable energy future will not be easy. The typical electric car requires 6 times more inputs of rare earths and 3,000 microchips. And the present scarcity and concentration of production in China and other countries unfriendly to the U.S. suggests that conflict over these strategic materials is definitely going to grow. And then there's the paradox of clean tech. All the critical metals necessary for wind turbines, solar panels, electric vehicle engines and magnets, such as cobalt, gallium, lithium, germanium, rare earths, are far scarcer than petroleum and anything but clean. So we can talk more about Mountain Pass. As I mentioned, they are expanding. They're trying to be able to refine the material. Right now, they have to ship it to China. So technically speaking, the U.S. produces 0 rare earth oxides right now. They make the concentrate in Mountain Pass, they ship it to China, and it disappears into the marketplace. They're working on doing it here, the refining here, which would be a major milestone. And then they also want to go a further step and make the permanent magnets in the United States. So slowly but surely, unfortunately too slowly, we're filling in the supply chain. And so we just need to accelerate it. And wherever Congress can help in terms of funding to move things faster, I think it would be welcome. I'll just say one final comment. What happens when everybody starts talking about rare earths is that every junior mine, I shouldn't say every, many junior mines in Canada, the United States, South America, suddenly change from a silver mine or a copper mine into a rare earth mine. They all want funding, and so they use it as a marketing tool. We're going to solve our problem. And so my 501c, the Hay Seward Economic Security Initiative, is basically monitoring these hundreds of junior miners and trying to figure out the 10 or 12 that are really worth supporting. So I think I'll stop there and look forward to your questions. Thank you.